Raquel R., welcome to Freedom Talk. It's really good to have you on. You're out there in Long Island
Yeah.
and you are Jewish, is that correct?
Yes. I'm Jewish. Yes.
And you related to me over social media because you've been following Freedom Talk for some time. I've always appreciated you, by the way. We've talked
Thank
online, but you were relating some experiences you've had as a Jew living in New York in the U.S. Tell me your thoughts about the whole situation right now.
Well, first of all, I don't know if it's understood by your audience that every Jew that I speak to is traumatized. I just don't. I mean, they might think that because there are some Jews who are like Jews for Palestine, that that's representative of Jews in the United States. In no way are those Jews representative of anyone. They are perhaps the tiniest percentage of every Jew I talk to is traumatized. Every Jew I speak to, if either they know someone in Israel who's suffering or they know someone who knows someone, everyone is connected. And there's a lot of trauma right now happening in the Jewish community. And really, in a way that I have never seen in my life.
Yeah.
That's something that has to be noted. And I don't think it's fully appreciated by people who might be far removed from everything.
Yeah, and it's amazing to me because I watched on social media this morning some young Jewish girls at an American university, I believe it was in Washington,
Yeah.
crying and saying, "Why are you allowing Hamas to speak?" It seems to me like this is immense hypocrisy that the left is constantly talking about safe spaces and all your words are literally violence, and then they're going to allow people to promote slaughter and mass murder and terrorism. I don't quite see the consistency there.
Well, of course, there is not consistency, but it's not surprising in many respects because I also read years, not that long ago, about how the Holocaust has been described in certain leftist circles as Jew on Jew violence. And I don't know that, basically Jews are whatever is bad. So they're white when white is bad, and they're not white when not being white is bad. So there, that's how you could think of Jews. And so amongst the leftist circle, they are considered colonial oppressors, and they cannot countenance any form of pain that the Jewish people might be having because they're not allowed pain because they're colonial oppressors. And somehow that narrative has really taken hold in universities and large parts of the left,
Mhm.
and really at the highest levels of much of American society. I know that many universities, my own alma mater, they uh, they wrote like a kind of very passive statement in response to everything that's happened, including the murder of babies. Very passive statement. They weren't very passive with regards to BLM, Ukraine, all sorts of other issues that they were, really very strong on. But for
Yeah.
this issue, very, very passive. And it's really decades in the making.
Yeah, I find some things extremely troubling right now because, I'm 54 years old. I grew up learning about the Holocaust. I've studied the conflict in Judea, Palestine for 4 decades intensely. I remember reading as a young teenager, "Oh Jerusalem," that book, and just seeing the appalling level of violence that has happened. I'm going to mute you while I'm talking here because we get a little feedback. I'll unmute you as soon as I'm done yapping here. But what I'm seeing right now that troubles me greatly is I'm seeing people who even call themselves Christians or conservatives saying things that I think are anti-Semitic, and I don't know if they even realize the nature of what they're saying. But I'm seeing people saying, "Oh well, everything that you're seeing in the media is a fabricated hoax." Let's just start with that one. All these pictures of the dead babies or AI, all that kind of thing. Can you tell me anything that you know or that you've heard that refutes that idea?
Well, it's one of those hard things that, frankly speaking, I've been extremely troubled by because for the last 15 years, have noticed tremendous amounts of anti Semitism from the left that really come from a form of um, really this leftist narrative of Jews being the oppressor and the Palestinians are the oppressed. Always have to back the oppressed no matter what, no matter any fact pattern. And I get, we know that. but there's this rising anti-Semitism from these conservative circles. I don't even know if they're conservative in the traditional sense of conservative that I've absolutely seen online. And they just seem to back every form of conspiracy theory. Like, as an example, some people that I personally know, they don't believe there was a moon landing. And so that everything's a conspiracy. And I think that COVID-19 really helped that along, because here there actually was a conspiracy, like in the sense the lab leak and a cover up, and then all this lockdown. We knew that masking didn't work. We knew the vaccine didn't stop the spread, and yet the media says what it says. So there was a conspiracy there. That doesn't mean everything is a conspiracy. And yet it seems that there's this large portion of people who would traditionally be associated with the right that now seem to believe everything is a conspiracy. And what could I say to debunk this notion of those 40 dead babies, or any, what could I say? I mean, there are pictures of dead bodies that you could see online. There's families who flatly lost their loved ones. I have a friend on Facebook whose nephew was one of the first found murdered in the that music festival. But none of it matters, because once you start going down the rabbit hole of, well, there was no moon landing and everything is a conspiracy, then there's no debunking it for people who think that way. That's
yeah. Well, what they do is they start with a preconceived notion and then search for breadcrumbs that are going to bolster their theories. And that's not the way that we do academics. We don't start with a premise. We follow the evidence where it leads. And the evidence to me is overwhelming that, yes, indeed, this has happened. And I know that there can be online, there can be some doctoring of photos, and all that kind of thing is always going to go on. It's the fog of war. But I find it asinine for people to be so unaware today, because this history of the Islamic radicals, or people in these Arabic-speaking nations in particular, not everyone's that way. I know plenty of Muslims who wouldn't take this hostile approach, but that violence toward the Jews that I read as a young man, and so I see a pattern going way back. This isn't. People seem to think, oh, this is something made up. They'll liken it to Ukraine. I truly believe there's some real funny business going on with Ukraine. I believe a lot of money laundering is going on there. Biden's involved in that. But Ukraine is a false comparison. There's absolutely no relation between it, because the Arab-Israeli conflict goes back centuries. And I'm just appalled at how little education people have. So I'll tell you this, you'll want to watch this show, Raquel. I saw Karis Rhea. I saw her on Jan Jekielek's American Thought Leaders on Epic TV. And so I reached out to Jan and another friend I have there, and she's going to come on our show because she knew this topic so well. She had a good grasp of the history, and I'm very interested in putting out good, solid information. I'm tired of everyone setting themselves up as an expert. Everybody has a camera and a microphone, but there are a lot of people that just, frankly, pardon my language, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. They really don't. and it's frustrating to me. I've also heard this theory that the Jews aren't real Jews. They're Khazarians. The Ashkenazi Jews are from the Khazar Empire, and they're not ethnically Jews. And then they use Revelation 2:9, those from the synagogue of Satan. And I pointed out this Revelation 2:9 is referring to the first century church of Smyrna. It has nothing to do with what's happening in the latter days, you might say. So I'm fighting all of these just wacky, goofy ideas that are out there, and people who are saying these are so convinced they're true. But I guess the best I can do, Raquel, is bring in people who have factual information.
Parents, those of you who don't know me, you know, a nickname is I'm the pedophile hunter, and we do work overseas. I mean, different parts of the globe, but here in the U.S., we actually started a task force. So I'm telling you from practical real life, abundant real life experience, from helping get women and children back from ISIS to, you know, messing up cartel action to stuff in other parts of the country I can't even mention. But I would say this, don't look for the white van to open up and grab your kid. The biggest problems you're going to encounter are the phone and the computer. That's the two biggest, phone and computer. The next will be someone you know. It'll be a relative, a neighbor, a kid's boyfriend or girlfriend. It's very easy to look way off and think of extremes. Those do happen. What you have to be aware of is your child being groomed by somebody online, and I'm talking even gaming. I just got info from the FBI saying there are groups targeting children to get them to provide nudes and videos of them. It's happening widespread. You know, last year, 33 million in the U.S., there were 33 million transfers of child sexual abuse material. Out of 33 million known tips of this stuff, only about 300 got prosecuted. The police are not the answer. 911 is not the answer for your children. It's you. If your kid wants to be on a cell phone or a computer, let them sit at the table. There's no shame in that. Not their back to you. If there's something they're trying to hide or uncomfortable with, they shouldn't be on it. When they say, that's my own privacy, you just go, yeah, not these days, not in our home. I'm not going to check anything unless I get a ping about a word or something that comes up or an image. But folks, please, it's the phone, it's the computer, it's someone you know that will try to compromise your child by grooming them, getting them to feel comfortable. And then, of course, as always, it's the outside predators.
I'm just having some sort of problems connectively. I don't know what it is. It could be because my husband's using it downstairs, and I don't know.
Okay, no problem. Well, I was saying, Raquel, that there are all these kooky theories out there. One of them is that the Jews of Palestine, the Jews of Israel, are not true Jews. They're Khazars. And I asked a friend about that who has degrees in Eastern European studies. He's been to Slavic areas. He knows a lot about Eastern Europe. He knows a lot about Jewish history. And he sent me some articles saying that no, actually they're not. And there are Sephardic Jews. There are so many ethnically Jewish people from all over the world. So I find that people are trying to justify persecution of the Jews by saying they're not actually racially Jews.
Well, it's a crazy idea because there's no such thing as a racial Jew necessarily, because Jews, you can convert to Judaism.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? What does it mean to be a racial Jew? I mean, that's a Nazi idea in the first place, that Jews are a race when you can convert to Judaism.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to be Jewish is to be it's three things. It's on the one hand, it's a religion. On the second hand, it's a people. Okay. Mm-hmm. And on the third, and then it's also an ethnicity. But right. Yet you can convert in. So it's a little bit confusing in that regard, but that's the bottom line. And the idea of the Khazars, that was this tiny little kingdom in like Europe in the Middle Ages, and has no bearing on the reality of Ashkenazi Jews. Yeah. And Jews can trace their lineage back many years. And beyond that, of course, Israel is plurality Sephardic. And, the Sephardim, they were kicked out of the Arab world. I mean, right. What is that about? How come that was okay? I mean, these are Jews who were living in Iran. They were living in Iraq. They were in Libya. They were in Turkey. They were in, basically throughout the Middle East is where they lived. They were in Yemen. They had to flee for their lives. Yeah. They were kicked out. Yeah. And people talk about the displacement of the Palestinians. They forget that Jews were displaced by the Arab countries, and it was a pact that the Arab League made to do so. Yeah. And somehow that gets ignored. And there hasn't been any compensation for, at the time it was, 700,000 or 800,000 Jews who were kicked out of their homes. Yeah. No compensation. They had to flee for their lives. It should be a simple idea that murdering children and taking them hostage is not okay. And I don't know why that's beyond the ability for people to, there's no justification for it. Let's throw it back to the Holocaust. Yeah. During the Holocaust, there were some Jews who had guns, okay? And I don't know if you know that, but there were the Bielski Brigade, okay?
I do know that, yeah.
There were some that were the partisans in the forest, okay, in parts of Eastern Europe. Obviously, the vast majority of Jews were disarmed and did not fight back because they could not fight back. But there were small brigades that had weapons and could fight back, and they did not start murdering babies in their cribs.
No.
And this was a Holocaust. And if they did, it wouldn't have been justified.
Yeah.
There is no justification. It should be simple and clear to say that.
Oh, absolutely.
And I don't understand why that's beyond the realm of people to comprehend. And the only thing I could say is it's anti-Semitism. They're so anti-Semitic, they can't even recognize it. They think it's a joke that, oh, you're an anti-Semite. Ha ha, of course I can talk. They make it into a joke.
Yeah.
Their moral equivocation, they'll say, oh, two sides. I'm going to be called an anti-Semite. And then when you call them that, they'll be like, ha, see, I knew I would be called an anti-Semite. They make it into a joke, but they are, in fact, literally anti-Semites because there is no justification for killing a baby in their crib.
No. I've made that same point that even you can look at the book of Exodus. There were Egyptians and I want to say Nubians who left Egypt and became Israelites. Throughout the Bible, there were people who converted to Judaism. And people seem to forget that Christianity is deeply rooted in Judaism. Without Judaism, there wouldn't be Christianity. But, on this issue, of course, nobody's perfect. Like any other nation, Israel has made its mistakes and has its black marks. But there really aren't two sides in the sense that one side wants to coexist. The other side wants to push all the Jews into the sea. And that they've never backed down from that. And anyone like Anwar Sadat, who has dared to sit down and talk peace, what happened to Sadat? He was assassinated. I'm not terribly surprised by the ignorance, and people do need education. But what really shocks me is just the straight, outright anti-Semitism that some people have, even people that I'm friends with, and they don't even see it. These theories of the Ashkenazi Jews. First of all, it's not true. I've seen the genetic studies. Jews mixed everywhere they went. There are Jews in the United States who've mixed with Latinos and different things. I have some Latino friends who have Sephardic roots, but who cares about all this racial stuff? It's a religion, it's a belief system, it's a longing for a homeland, for a national identity. The Jews have been through hell and back and persisted. I know that the Jewish people are going to get through this too, but I don't care if I lose friends or followers or anything. People need to knock it off with these wacky theories. You're right, because at its foundation, killing babies, murdering innocent people, there's nothing justifiable about that. The Hamas people who did this are not heroes. I don't believe all the Palestinians want Hamas there. I'm pretty furious right now. I'm not even a Jew, for all I know.
And also, I just want to mention something about Ukraine, because you mentioned it earlier. Now, I don't call myself an expert in Russia-Ukraine the way that I would with regards to Israel and the Arab conflict. But I do know that Russia is deeply involved in Iran, and Iran is, in many respects, at least in some respects, is a Russian proxy. And I believe that Russia okayed this war because this was obviously okayed by Iran. Obviously, Iran has a tremendous role in this, and if Iran had a role in this, so did Russia. And so, with regards to Ukraine, there's a complex history between Jews and Ukraine. And in fact, most of the Jews I know fled Ukraine in terror, from pogroms and from... There is a history of anti-Semitism from Ukraine, and maybe even it goes on today. There's also a history of anti-Semitism from Russia.
Absolutely.
But, frankly, it's from both places. But whatever the history and whatever the questionable, and I'm not denying questionable, military contracts, and whatever the statements that I would call eyebrow raising from Zelensky, at the end of the day, if Russia is emboldened, that also emboldens Iran. And that's an uncomfortable reality too. And I don't know what to make of that, but that's how I see it.
Yeah. That gets pretty complex. I mean, some pretty complex geopolitics. Sometimes, Raquel, I don't think that the world wars ended. They just took a pause because we're still seeing the same worn out arguments and hatreds and racial animosities.
It's so much worse than that. I have a friend he speaks Chinese and he reads Chinese media. Most people do not do that. Now, China has no history of anti-Semitism. And yet today it came out
that an Israeli ambassador to China, or someone in the diplomatic corps anyway from Israel, was just stabbed today in China. And in China, of all places. And in China, he's following the Chinese media, and he's saying it's very anti-Israel. It never used to really even highlight Israel. It wasn't even a thing. They've really taken an anti-Israel stance. Yeah. This is very troubling.
It is.
It seems that there's an entire axis out there that, like, the Cold War is back. It's very frightening.
I do believe the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, is working with Hamas. They want to destabilize Israel and the United States, and they want us to be so caught up in terrorism and regional disputes that it weakens us to where China can gain the hegemony that they want. That's a different story, but I have limited time. Unfortunately, I want to talk to you some more, but I want to talk about your experiences. You have children you've got at least one child going to preschool, and you've told me some things about some of the Jewish schools and synagogues and institutions there. What are people feeling there in the New York area?
It's very troubling. So today, the leader of Hamas called for a global day of terrorism, and the fellow moms of the pre-K that I send my 3-year-old to, they became so upset about this that they kept their children home. And I felt, my feeling is it's very unlikely that it would happen on a day's warning, that it'll happen without warning. And I cannot live my life constantly just sitting inside all day. That, right, evokes from COVID times. And frankly, they win if you live in terror.
Mm-hmm.
But nonetheless, many different Jewish schools have been preemptively closed in the New York area in fear of what was said by the leader of Hamas. I have more than one friend who they even want to send their kids to school but cannot because the school was closed. And Jews understand that they are a primary target in this country.
Yeah.
And just at Columbia, just yesterday, there was an Israeli who was beaten up at Columbia University. This is a real thing. Jews are a target, and I don't think it's well understood that it's not just an issue in Israel, that American Jews are a target too, but we also have to live our lives and not be in terror, and that's also extremely important.
Yeah.
And one thing I am very worried about is that New York State has a law that you cannot bring firearms into religious congregations. And we'll call it well-intentioned, but as a result of that, there are Jewish congregations that are really targets, and you cannot legally bring your firearm in New York State into the Jewish congregation. Let's say you are armed and trained and know how to fight, and you just want it to have it for safety. You can't legally bring your firearm, and I don't think it's well understood nationally that that's the case, but that strikes me as ban on religious institutions.
That strikes me as unconstitutional because you have a natural right to defend yourself. So I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but if it were me, I would just ignore it, and I would conceal carry. I would say, look, I'm gonna do whatever it takes to take care of my family. But I'll say this before we go, and like I said, I do want to talk more, but I think there are a couple bright spots, you might say. One is that I know that these Arabic-speaking peoples, the common person who falls for this stuff, who gets whipped up into a frenzy, they're very emotional, and it tends to be a flash in the pan because we hear this kind of rhetoric over and over again. It's not to dismiss it, and it's not to say don't be careful, but I don't think you have to live in fear of it because this is a very passionate, emotional people, and they're prone to, this flashpoint anger and then not really doing a lot about it. The other bright spot, while it's unfortunate in a way, but if they were to do some things here, we are an armed country, and they would get wiped out. If they try something here in the U.S., I guarantee the worse they do, the worse they're going to get it in return. So it would be a very unwise thing for Hamas or any other terrorist groups to try something in the U.S. And I'm keeping in touch with Border Patrol agents, all kinds of people down on the border. I know we're being infiltrated. That's a concern. I'm speaking with congressmen about this. We've got to get a handle on that. But these people who are infiltrating, if they have some plan in mind, we're not Israel. We're not countries that are not armed. We have a lot of guns here. So there's a bright spot in the Second Amendment.
That might well be in Tennessee or Arizona, but that is not the case in Blue State USA, and that is not the case in the synagogues of New York. And so that has to be, understood as well, that these are real soft targets. And I hope that nothing happens. And obviously, but we have to live our lives, and we have to, I know the police are patrolling the synagogues, though. I will tell you that.
That's
the
good.
Police have increased their patrols of the synagogues because they understand that there is a threat. In any event, I will say it's very important that we all stand together and the Jewish people are united. And that is a very important message, because the Jewish people historically are not united. We are historically very divided. Especially recently. There was practically a civil war in Israel right before everything happened. I don't know if you understood the extent of it, how divided the country of Israel really was. And I think that could have even instigated the horrific terrorist attack in the first place, because of how divided the Jewish people, both internationally but specifically in Israel, were. But they are not divided anymore. And there are plane loads of Israeli Americans who are flying to Israel just to volunteer for the IDF.
Yeah.
And that is incredible and really awe-inspiring. And the unity is, I think that because Jews are united right now, that's why we're safe. And I think that it's very easy to despair, but we have to take comfort in being united.
Well, know that you have friends too. And I've reached out to some people here who are Jewish, and I've said, we will protect you. We will stand with you. And it's interesting because when I was in Tucson, as you know, we had a coffee shop there, and we got all kinds of trolls and death threats and harassment. And one person in particular who claimed he's Jewish started publicly saying that I'm anti-Semitic and made a big stink about it. And I got contacted by a gentleman who's known as the leader of the Jewish community in Tucson. And we had a really nice talk, and he realized, he's probably not. and indeed I'm not, but I reached out to him on Facebook, and I found his information, and I just said, hey, I stand with you without reservation. I sent copies of my social media. So if he ever had any doubt at these false accusations, because I've been called anti-Semitic, I've been called Islamophobic, I've been called everything, because when you disagree with the narrative, they'll attach whatever label to you. But
and there is one more important point I want to leave your viewers with, which is that Hamas, in many respects, are the greatest, if you want to say, Muslimophobe, okay? Because they killed anyone that they could be in touch with in Israel, including Muslims, including Arab Israelis, okay? They killed anyone they could. They would kill Arab Israeli Muslims. They would kill anyone who disagrees with them.
Yeah.
They kill gays if you're gay, you're hung from the trees. They kill, God forbid you're a feminist.
Well, yeah, and I have many friends who are...
It's important to remember that.
I have a number of Islamic friends. I taught in Sri Lanka, and about a third of my students were Muslim. I'm not... I hate their stupid terms. I don't hate Muslims. I hate extremism. If you want to get to the pure meaning of Semite or Semitic, the Arabic peoples are Semites as well, sons of Shem. It's a long drawn out family feud, and I'm all for peace. I'm not unrealistic or wishful thinking, but I know Jews and Muslims who get along just fine, and I think probably your average person would. But you have these hateful groups who are constantly stirring people up, constantly ratcheting up the rhetoric, and refusing to live together. And that's one thing that I've seen Israel do, is that they have been willing to live and let live. But that's my perspective.
Also, remember that I think it's 20% of Israel are considered Arab Israeli. And I'm talking about, the Israel within I'm not talking about, West Bank, also known as Judea, Samaria. We're talking about within the country of Israel itself, that whatever normal, internationally recognized borders. And, they are full citizens. They serve on the Supreme Court. They vote. They go to university. They're doctors. They, they could serve in the army. Many of them do serve in the army. These are full citizens, and this is completely forgotten. And, the equality that Arabs have within Israel, of course, it's a divided country, but equality on a level that is a Western level of equality, and it just gets ignored, and that's an important thing to remember.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Really, it's light versus darkness, and it's good versus evil. It's civilized people who treat others as human beings and people who behave more like animals. And there's no justification for what these Hamas butchers have done. There's no two sides to this. There is innocent people being killed and slaughtered, and we have to condemn it. And I get tired of the left because they're constantly victim blaming. They're constantly saying, oh, well, the person who perpetrated the violence, society must have done something to them. Somebody oppressed them. Nonsense. There's no excuse for that. None. So thank you for coming on. Obviously I get passionate about this too, but God bless you and your family, and God watch over all the Jews of our country and of Israel, and shalom, may peace reign.
Thank you very much. I wish for peace for everyone. Thank you.
Same. Okay, good to talk to you, Raquel. We'll be in touch again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Guys, if you're out there and you're listening to these theories, these accounts that are saying things like talking about the ethnic makeup of the Jews and whether they're Jews or not, I can refute those silly principles. I have a degree in theology. I've been studying theology and history for 4 decades and beyond. And please just don't give them the time of day. They're very deceptive and they're not true. They'll have grains of truth just enough to pull you in. And please, we're in the fog of war. There are going to be fake photos and videos and everything else. We live in 5th generation warfare where there's a lot of deception, but please don't buy into a theory that this is all some sort of conspiracy and fabricated. Maybe there's some truth to that, but the truth we know is that people are dying and suffering right now, and we need to be compassionate, we need to be helpful, and we need to condemn terrorism in all of its forms. That hatred is there. We're seeing it spill out into our country. Stop with the conspiracy theories. Start with being a human. Pray about it. Please don't get caught up in these narratives that people spin, because it's just a broken record. It's a retread on old themes, and we don't want to get caught up in it. So stay strong, stay faithful, look to God, look to people who actually know their Bibles and history rather than people who have a good social media following. See you next time on Freedom Talk.